Okay, everybody, thank you for coming back to the Xanadu Review. My name is Prester John Anders, but as always, you can just call me PJ. Well, today with me, I have Klaus Zinski, and Klaus is an interesting writer who covers a lot of different interesting stuff. Klaus, thanks for coming on, man. Do you want to tell the audience a little bit about yourself, the different blogs that you have, and kind of the beat that you cover?
Well, hey, PJ, thank you very much for having me. In terms of introducing myself, I guess I would say in general, I would describe myself as a fiction writer with an essay habit. When I published my first short story back in 2023, it occurred to me I didn't really have anywhere to refer people who might enjoy it and want to read more of my stuff. So I figured Substack, being the ascendant platform for writers at the time, made sense to get on there. I've been in and out, but decided to kind of get serious about it in the back half of 2024. And in that time, I would say, generally speaking, my essays kind of go into two main categories: the ones that have research and the ones that don't. The ones that have research, I would say, generally tend to be a little more business-y, tend to focus on, I guess, the intersection between art and culture and the economic forces that ultimately shape so much of art and cultural production, and as well as the ones that don't have research, I would say, are generally just me attempting to kind of put into words some kind of ambient phenomenon I've been witnessing in the way people interact with each other and the way people conceive of each other more broadly, I guess.
Yeah, and I feel like kind of aren't we all doing that right now? I think, it's funny you say that. I'm kind of the same way. I'll do either like a vibes-based essay that I will write basically all in one sitting, or it's like pulling teeth where I read books and take notes and stuff. And I'm just so much not from that background, but it's funny how much easier the vibes-based ones are sometimes. And at least for me, I don't know about you. Like, I feel like those ones usually get way more traction.
They definitely, I'll say, when I just have a feeling, the process is a lot quicker. I find the revision can be kind of painstaking in those, but generally speaking, I think so. My educational background is I double majored in English writing and philosophy. And when you write philosophy papers, you get graded on how well you show your work. And so when I try to write about something, I always like to have some sort of hard fact or point you can refer to back up what I'm attempting to say, because I find there's a lot of essays I've read where I really do enjoy it, and I like, okay, you're putting forth a very interesting theory. Just tell me how you got there, and then people will just kind of like wave a hand and say, oh, well, the vibes, and it's you were doing so well. I just want to know how you ended up there. It's in the immortal words of Sherlock Holmes, data, data, data. I can't make bricks without clay.
Yeah, well, it's interesting that you say that. I guess as an aside before we get into some of the other stuffs that that I wanted to talk to you about. So what does that look like for you? Since I'm somebody like I've only been writing for about, I guess I've been doing Substack for a year and a half, and because I had a friend who encouraged me. It's like, you have some interesting things to say. He was a writer. He was on Substack. He encouraged me to do it. So I did like very, very vibes based for the first couple things that I did that were just kind of like based on my life experiences, and kind of like you said, what you see in the world and trying to make sense of it. And then I tried like, okay, well, I don't, for example, like I didn't go to college personally, so I don't really have, I guess, what would you say, like an intellectual background or anything like that? So I guess I'm just curious to what your framing is for that, and like what. This is partially me like trying to learn how to be a better writer, but also just interested to your process and everything, because what is that distinction for you?
Well, first and foremost, I really ought to have said this in my last statement, is that I never want to impugn anybody else's process, especially because the vast majority of people that are on Substack are not getting paid. Don't drive yourself into the ground reading books and doing like hours and hours of research for something that's not going to make you money. You gotta don't work your fingers to the bone for a viewing public that might not care. But as far as my process goes, it is just I think partially why a lot of my stuff ends up at the intersection of, like, I want to write about movies, or I want to write about, let's just say, for instance, I wanted to do something about comics because I like comics. My first step would be, okay, well, has there been reporting from something like the Business Insider, Yahoo Finance, the Wall Street Journal? Because that's all facts and figures, that's all profit statements, that's all reports, and all of that ends up being public. And that's a lot of data. You can say, well, this worked, this didn't, this made money, this didn't. And that ultimately is what's going to shape so much of the future of any of these properties that we like. Like, for instance, I did one on, when I was first getting started on Substack, I did an extended series called Kicking and Streaming, where I was just trying to like go through streaming platforms and look at, okay, what's your business model like? And do I think you're succeeding or not? And the Disney one completely got away from me. I ended up with too much research on that because it's impossible to report on Disney. It's like, it's like a Hydra. You just find it's just endless arms, endless, I'm mixing metaphors, endless heads of this monster. And I think that was a lesson personally for me, that it's like the right amount of research is the amount of research where you can go to market with feeling like your ass isn't completely hanging in the wind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that makes sense. And I feel like maybe that's where the organic passion is going to come from. Because at least for me, like most of the stuff I've done so far has been, I've already read this book. Like I've already read a shit ton about, so like, Russian history or something like that. It's like, okay, how can I do something with this and not annoy my friends and my wife about, or like me just randomly talking about like historical topics or like this book that I read.
Yeah, I like, don't end up writing a whole nother book, or maybe you should, maybe we all should, but it's that takes a long time.
Yeah, well, at least I think at least for me with the creative I've only in the last like couple of months I feel like I have what I would call a process, and it just for me and the way my brain works and organization, it works, but like you said, I think it's going to be a lot of different things for a lot of different people. But I guess we don't want to get too caught up in like the so-called creative process. I wanted to have you want to talk about other things, but that was just it was an interesting aside. I'm always interested in people's creative process, so to speak. But so one of your pieces that I thought was really interesting, and you forgive me, the exact title was something along the lines of like why you should grind your own coffee, or like in defense of being a snob. And I thought that was a really interesting one. I was wondering if you wanted to speak on that a little bit. Correct me on the specifics of the title, because for me personally, like I don't want to say struggle, but I go back and forth between really enjoying some of the more highbrow stuff, but also like really enjoying a lot of like the populist stuff. And I think the way you talked about coffee as a metaphor was a really good through line between the two.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to kind of get those stories down on paper before I forget them, because it's a part of my life that's only getting smaller in the rearview mirror. I don't really mind too much if people misremember the titles or whatever. I tend to make them up right near the end, and so it's a bit of marketing brain. I just try to title it in such a way where it's going to get people interested. But I think it's interesting for me because I didn't drink coffee until much later in life. I didn't drink it until I had like a professional affiliation with it, and I think for me, I never really, I never had much experience for the way the sort of the way people tend to engage with coffee through big chains or through just buying the big tubs of Folgers and keeping them in the fridge or the freezer to keep them fresh as long as they can. And one of the first things I learned when I was doing it professionally was that when you grind it, it goes stale rather quickly. But if you just buy the beans, they're shelf stable basically forever, and they cost about the same. And so it never really made sense to me. Once I decided I wanted to just start making my own coffee rather than getting it from wherever I happened to be working at the time. I just figured, well, I'll spend $25 on a grinder, and if it breaks, I I'll get another one, I guess, maybe get a nicer one, but I still have that same grinder. Well,
Yeah, well, those things will kind of last you a long time, especially if you take care of them. And it was interesting to me because my wife years back used to be a barista. She's very much a coffee snob, and I'm kind of like you. Like for the most part, I was much more of a tea drinker. When I drink coffee, it's like okay, coffee's coffee. I just need a little extra kick if I'm working or out in the field or doing something like that. But there is really something to I feel the process of kind of like you mentioned, grinding the beans and using like because we're we have the drip coffee machine, we have the French press, and I don't really know what you call them, like the it's like a decanter almost. You know what I'm talking about? That
I
has the
think so, yeah.
yeah, it's like it has the bottom bulb to it and the upper top. It's kind of like drip coffee, but it
The
has
pour over, yeah.
yeah, the pour over. That's what I was
Uh,
thinking for.
I
So we have
think
all
like the thing that I'm kind of like, I went back and I reread it, and the thing that I think I'm struck by, I guess, is that it's like if you get into like coffee people, like it really there's like far higher levels to this stuff where it's like, oh, I'm gonna buy a home espresso machine and I'm gonna like get serious about like what roasts I like and what single origins and whatever. I don't really have any of that. I'm just like, I prefer to support smaller businesses over larger ones. I'd prefer to make a purchase that I think is going to be a better long-term proposition and lead to a better long-term product. And I guess the ultimate, the thing about being a snob in the modern parlance is that it's often kind of associated with just like having a degree of like going to like more than the minimum effort is kind of been painted as snobbish, and I don't necessarily think that's the right word for it, but it's sort of how we get it. It ends up coming out, and I think you feel those accusations when you try to tell people that no, you should want better because I think you're being taken advantage of.
Yeah, well, it makes me think of, I don't know, to use like their internet parlance of how the term enjoyer has become something um, that's been used more commonly because, the term like fan gets associated with like, your prototypical Reddit person where, because to me, like, be it coffee or, because I'm a big vinyl guy, for example, like I love music. There's something to like enjoying the process of something and going a little bit deeper and like coffee was the example I think is really good because I know some people like literally will buy raw beans and roast them themselves, and like to me that's going a little bit too overboard. Or the same thing with like I don't know if because you're a big music guy, I don't know how much of an audiophile you are when it comes to vinyl or like audio fidelity. Like
I've fallen back into the trap of buying records recently.
It's easy to do, but as far as like audio fidelity, I remember years back, and I think it was 2011 or something when the most recent Radiohead album came out, and I was so hyped for it. King of Limbs, kind of disappointing ultimately. But in any case, like I got it on like the FLAC audio format, and I was like, oh, I'm so excited for this, and I was like, I don't think I can actually tell the difference between FLAC and MP3. So, much in the same way, like, be it that or coffee or really any sort of consumption like that, there seems to be a fine line between enjoying something on a deeper level than just like pure consumption and being kind of a redditor, for a lack of a better term, where it's more like the fetishization of the commodity than the art or the what you're consuming itself, if that makes sense.
I think you got to keep yourself in check to some degree, I think, because you never want to like you don't want to like look down too much on people, because I think the real difference here, the thing that kind of sets people apart is like, okay, curiosity versus routine. Like, I don't buy farmers market coffee certainly because I get a good deal. I don't buy farmers market coffee because I think, ooh, I'm going to taste like a rich caramel note or whatever. It's coffee. I'm just curious. Is this better than what I can get at Trader Joe's? Is this better than what I can get at whatever chain supermarket? And I think that's kind of what every hobby, every affectation, I think ultimately has that is am I just gonna go with what I know, what I is the routine, or am I gonna okay, so what's the next level deeper? What's the next layer I can become involved? And like maybe that's canceling Spotify or de-emphasizing Spotify in your life, and see it rooting around in your parents' garage for CDs or tapes or whatever. Maybe that's watching movies on streaming less often and trying to catch them in the theaters. It's like you can do a little bit, and often the rewards are really great, I think.
Yeah, well, I would agree. I think, at least for me, like the example, I mean, I'm not a huge coffee guy. At least for me, a lot of the times it's more about, I just need some caffeine in the morning.
That's right.
But I do enjoy. I feel like to me, like the difference is like, what do you do when it's not about um, the the feedback you might get from social media or other people who are into that hobby, and what do you really get from some fulfillment from? Since I do like on a weekend, like making the pour over or a French press, that's nice. But to me, like the vinyl is a better example, just because I've been a huge music fan and audiophile, ever since I was pretty young. I got into music back when CDs were still the primary medium where people would listen to it, and MP3 became a thing like just as I was getting into high school. And it's weird, and I think you're maybe like 10 years younger than me ish or something, and I probably sound like the prototypical millennial boomer. But
I
at
mean,
the
I
time,
had CDs. I had, they were a great deal, is the thing. Especially once I first got a car that had
mhm.
a CD
Yeah,
changer. You just go to the flea market, you can get like all these for like
yeah. Well,
15
back
bucks.
in like a decade ago, since there was they've gotten significantly more expensive now, but you could literally get CDs for a penny on Amazon, and I had so many. But my point I was trying to get to is not to be like a back in my day type of person, but even like the first generation iPods, you would have limited amount of space on there, and you'd have to be mindful of what you put on, and that was going up from the CDs. And at first, like it's very it, it's being a kid in a candy store. You can get anything you want at any time, and but at a certain point, I feel like there is some diminishing returns when it comes to streaming, because I definitely enjoyed music a lot less. It's not unlike my consumption of coffee, where it's something I put on in the gym or to the commute, and it's a significantly different experience even to have like a CD in the car, or to actually have like a physical vinyl where you're listening to something mindfully, and you can skip a song on a vinyl, but it's kind of annoying to do. So you have to be, usually listen to at least the whole side of an album. And I think to me the mindful consumption, and because I've become like a big physical media guy, which I think is something that you're into as well, from what I've
Yeah,
read. I
generally
bet.
speaking, and
Yeah.
I think it's like it's a two-pronged proposition, right? Because like music has seen a weird inversion of the way musicians actually make money over the past 30, 40 years now, where it used to be you toured in order to sell records. Now the only reason you put an album out is to tour behind it, because the album doesn't make you any money. Streaming Spotify is a terrible economic proposition for musicians, and it's only getting worse. But like the like the nice one of the nice things about records, especially new releases, new runs of records, is that for a fact a decent chunk of that money is going directly into the artist's pocket. And I think the other thing with it is, like you said, I think when you listen to something, as I generally always listen to full albums. That's kind of always been the way I consume music. I have a couple playlists, but I just tend to get into certain albums, and I think especially when you listen to them in the original format, you get a sense for why it was put together the way it is.
Mhm.
Because, like, okay, so there's only 3 songs on the side of the record because one of them is really long, or something like that. And even something that simple, it can reshape the way you understand the record as a whole piece of art, I guess.
Yeah, and I feel like, again, listening mindfully makes a difference. Or even things that, like, when I was talking about back in the day being a serious audiophile, like, oh, I need to have in FLAC format, because MP3 is garbage to me. And there's some debate on whether or not vinyl is better audio quality. And, some people say that because of the lack of compression, it has like that warmer sound. Um, and I think that's true to a degree. And I don't want to completely bore the audience about like the audio engineering side, but there is something to be said for that. But again, like you wonder, it's this diminishing return since I don't have like a really, really nice sound system. I have like an all-in-one like record CD player type thing. And there's smaller speakers. Like, does this really make a huge difference? But I feel like the mindful consumption where, like, the little snaps and pops and hisses that come with vinyl give it a certain aesthetic quality that's more than the sum of its parts.
As John Peel famously put it, when told that CDs were better than records because they eliminate surface noise, he said, "Listen, buddy, life has surface noise."
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Or like similarly the Miles Davis quote about, like, the silence in between the notes is just as important as the notes themselves.
Right.
Um, so to kind of shift gear a little bit, um, one of the things that you also talked about that in that piece was these kind of moments that you would have while working in this coffee shop, and the different kind of little relationships that you would have with people, um, like the regulars and the kind of eccentric people. And you kind of mentioned that that was something that was kind of more and more in the rear view mirror. Can't talk today. The rear view mirror for you. And I guess I'm curious. It sounds like you're more in the marketing world now, and that's something because I can relate to as well. Because I miss the camaraderie of shitty jobs when I used to work in kitchens and stuff like that. Um, and I'm curious to what your thoughts on there, because it sounds like there's a certain amount of melancholy.
It's funny because when I left, so I had the barista job for about 6 months, and then I transitioned into another job where I was cooking pizza. And when I was leaving that, basically, my boss told me that this exact thing was going to happen. That, like, you're going to get a job and you're going to be in an office somewhere and you're going to, like, look back on this as, like, being better than it was. And it's like, frankly, I am better off now. I'm certainly better compensated. I'm about as social as I've ever been. I have, it's better for my body. And, obviously having more money puts you in a position where you can be better to your body. You don't need to survive off of 7-Eleven and Taco Bell, and, you're not bent over and sweating and all the rest of it and working irregular hours. But I think, yeah, people complain about retail jobs, people complain about food service jobs, and there's a lot to complain about. There's a reason this isn't work most people seek to do. But I think, lucky in the sense that there is a certain camaraderie among people that are all sort of trying to figure something out. Like another minimum wage job I got when I first moved to where I currently live. I still have most of my best friends in the area are people I met at that job. And it's the thing I think the thing I think you miss is you don't miss the actual day to day. You miss these, like, weird little moments that the job kind of bestows upon you. You miss having those relationships. You miss having you miss, I think, you miss the way you used to be when you were in that job more than you miss the job.
Yeah, absolutely. And you kind of mentioned there's a certain camaraderie that comes with having a shitty job. And at least for me, it's I don't know about Ed. I'm curious, and I want to get to the marketing side because I find that interesting as well. But at least for me, there was never any existential stress when I was working, you know, uh, grilling steaks or washing dishes. Like I wouldn't, when I was working as a chef, I wouldn't get up to go to the bathroom and then not be able to go back to sleep because it's like, oh shit, I have this to do at work, that to do at work. Um, And that's something that I definitely miss. It was kind of, I think you really hit the nail on the head when you talked about your boss mentioning that you'll have this sort of like romanticized nostalgia for it. But I do remember like a couple years back, it was a time where I was working a lot of hours, and I work in the tech slash IT world.
Right.
I had a job where I was, it was basically just me for my state, and I had like 50 sites across my state that I had to manage. I stopped at a gas station to get some gas and some, as you mentioned, very unhealthy 7-Eleven food. And, just seeing like, multiple, like different generations of age and different people of different ethnicities who are all working together at the 7-Eleven, just kind of shooting the shit. And I felt like, this kind of mild but still profound sense of sadness of, the loss of purpose, I think, that comes with that day to day grind, even if like the job itself isn't meaningful. The relationships that you have with other people feel a lot more meaningful because I've worked in startups and stuff, and like I could give two shits about the people that I work about, but I still think about some of the people when I worked at a shitty bar with like 7 years ago.
Yeah, I think so. Coming from like a big food service background before I got, an office job, a full time job, I think one thing that you become very keenly aware of when you work in kitchens. I don't know what your experience with this was, but like it really taught me there is a hard and fast difference between a good workplace and a bad workplace.
Oh yeah.
And because bad kitchens are bad to the extreme. Good kitchens are great. They kick your ass still, but they're great. And I'm very lucky in the sense that I have a pretty healthy work environment. I've always been the person who just shows up to work. Like I don't really I'll be polite. I'll be nice as you want me to be. I'll do what you need me to do because again, when you work in food service, you get taught the worst sin you can ever commit in the workplace is to make more work for somebody. But I don't gossip. I don't like seek drama, and so I find it's very it's not like no stress. I think it's a lot more like little fiddly, like okay, move things around. I have a meeting here, I have a meeting there, I have a deadline I need to meet here. But I think I'm kind of blessed with a work environment that allows me to kind of pursue my own passions, not the least of which is the stuff you see on my Substack.
Hmm. Well, I think it's a good attitude to have because I think there seems to be a generational shift away from like the office being your whole life. But I'm curious to and say as much or as little as you'd like to maintain anonymity. But I'm curious to what it's like to work in the marketing world and how that intersects with the art that you do and how you look at art. Because you talked about that a little bit about there's the artistic side, but you also have to have like marketability so people will buy it. And it seems like, for the longest time, there's been a very like a poo-pooing of, the suit side, so to speak. But at the same time, like art has to sell if you want to have that be your job. So I'm curious to like how they intersected for you and how that's lent you a different perspective on art in general.
Yeah, I mean it's forever the tension, right? Like you need it does need to sell. It needs to be commodified to some extent, and some people will never make that sacrifice. And so they're some people are fine not making saleable art, and I applaud them for it. But just speaking for me, so just a note on myself where I am. I'm not like any sort of bigwig or anything. I work in search engine optimization for a mid-sized regional services firm. I won't say too much more about it, but it is like we're the reason I'm anonymous, partially just because I like anonymity and I feel it allows me to be more honest, but in a strictly professional capacity, I never want to be writing something just for myself, whether it's fiction, whether it's an essay, whatever, and have that thought of if my name is on this and my boss sees it, am I going to have a problem? And I think it's just easier to keep this part of my life and that part of my life separate in as much as I'm able. But I think so. I had, with my educational background being what it was, I I knew, like, I never had any interest in going into academia. You can't really get employed as, like, unless you want to teach English or teach philosophy. It's not like a direct line to a job. And so I got into SEO from interning in college, and it was just a skill set I could kind of keep building up. And eventually, the right job application lands in the right person's hands. I got interviewed, I got hired, and I think doing it in a professional capacity for like 3 years now, it does just kind of occur to you that, like, this is everything. Like, everything is. I mean, when you live in a market economy, you live in a capitalist system. Everything is selling you something to some extent. Everything is PR, everything is marketing, and increasingly, now that more and more life is performed online, everything is SEO. Now, maybe it's that old joke about Nick Land. Oh wow, the philosopher on methamphetamine thinks everything is accelerating. What a shocker!
Mm-hmm.
But,
Many such cases.
Yeah. But it allows you to kind of see the way. It allows you to see, like, it gives you a reference with which you can kind of look at the way people address anything, whether it's the smallest little things are just like, okay, so to what extent am I being marketed to? Am I being sold something? And I suppose that's kind of why, when I'm attempting to show my work, as it were, when I'm talking about some theory I have, I'm going to go directly to, okay, so what's the angle? How do you make a sale off of this?
Yeah, and that's something that does make sense. And I'm kind of the same way in regards to anonymity. Like, I have friends and family who know it's me and know that I write, and it's not like I'm doing, like, the Heil Hitler hour or something.
Oh no, yeah, like, this is.
But that having been said, my rule of thumb is, like, I never want to write something that would cause me to not be able to hold my head up high when I'm with friends and family. However, I might write something that an employer might not like.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like professional courtesy to some extent. Like, I don't really want to think too hard about it. I don't think I'm. I never want to, like, think of myself as, ooh, I'm giving you the real sky. I'm telling you the hard truths. But what my boss's employees do off the clock on their own time, he shouldn't have to worry too much about it.
Yeah. Well, I would definitely agree there. And I think especially, being anonymous, or, pseudonymous, I suppose, in either of our cases, I definitely feel like it lends me a lot more freedom to, and again, I'm not saying anything that I think is, like, super, super controversial, but it does, I don't feel like it's attached to me as a person. Like, Prester John is a fictional character for, all the ways that, most people interact with that. So it definitely makes me feel like I can just say what I want to, not even, like, without, fear of retaliation or getting doxxed or something like that. But, I just don't have to worry about, like, what the way I would conceptualize it if it was connected to me as a person versus me as a pseudonymous account.
Right. Yeah.
So to shift gears ever so slightly, um, I'm curious to your perspective on something, because you've written, I've seen you post a little bit about video games, and I'm curious if you think video games are art.
I am absolutely the wrong person to ask this question, because I have a pretty maximalist definition of art, and I don't really see it's like I don't necessarily see it as a debate even necessarily worth having. Now we can loop back around to it anyway, because it's worth talking about, I guess, in as much as we want to talk about it. But, like, I'm the type of person that I think, like, if you get that degree of emotional fulfillment out of it, it can be art to you. And actually, this has been a long-term fixture of my to-do list on here. Is at some point I am going to write a long-form essay putting forth my case as professional wrestling as the great American art form. Okay, like, as unironically as I possibly can, because I really believe it.
I'm curious to and we can loop back to the video games. I think that's a fairly good answer, but I'm almost more interested in that because I kind of as a joke, I've described wrestling as like it's drag for straight people
That's
because
a
I
good.
used to love wrestling when I was a kid and young teen, but I pretty much only liked the like the pageantry part of it. Like I would
Yeah.
get bored when they would start to fight. So what's your, don't spoil your whole article, but
I
what's
mean,
your
you're not
TLDR?
wrong, and you're not wrong, and I've seen that that sort of the label of, oh, this is drag brunch for straight presenting men, like
Hmm.
bandied about more often recently. But I think my view of it. So I'll start with a brief apocryphal story. Supposedly, I can't source this. I don't know if it's true. When Sigmund Freud was first coming to America to sort of propagate his theories, like lecture on the concept of psychoanalysis, he said he told a friend he was really, really worried that interacting with Americans would totally shoot his theories full of holes. And he described it this way, supposedly, that most people, they like chocolate and they like garlic. The problem with Americans is they will get the idea, they will take both of those things and they'll try to combine them. They'll try to dip garlic in chocolate. And I think in a weird way, that's kind of what pro wrestling is in a cultural context. It's like it's a morality play. It's a morality play. It's a western. It's a circus performance, feats of strength and acrobatics. It's trash TV. It's reality TV. It's a soap opera. And we take all these elements and we just put them in a big blender and we just pulse it until coherent. And for some reason, the whole rest of the world like just loves it. We've exported it successfully to, like the UK and Canada obviously had a hand in its invention and rise in popularity, but we've exported it to Japan. It's becoming more popular in continental Europe. The Persian Gulf states love it. It is, I think, like this like one size fits all, like all you can eat, like American buffet of American concepts and just the things we tend to value, I guess.
Well, I think that's a really beautiful way of putting it, and I'm curious. This is maybe, I don't know if this is even like an area of expertise for you, but I know like there's like the Mexican luchador tradition. Is that like evolved alongside? Is the American wrestling the progenitor? Because I think it lends to your theory either way. I think either or like being able to integrate the luchador tradition into American wrestling. Because Rey Mysterio was one of the big guys when I was coming up.
Yeah, it's parallel. It definitely runs parallel. I think there's language barriers, obviously, and it's a very different kind of like culture around it. And I think once again, the specter of economics rears its head because Mexico, traditionally a far poorer country than America, it's they have less. They can't pay foreign talent as much, and therefore not as many people go south of the border. But
Mhm.
it all sort of so back in the day, before WWF rose to become this world-spanning global brand and kind of buy out a lot of its competition. There used to exist this thing called, well, there does technically still exist, but not in the way it once did, this thing called the NWA, the National Wrestling Alliance,
Mhm.
where basically it was kind of like, it was one thing when you kind of take any interest in this is that the history of wrestling is also the history of telecommunications. When TV and radio was a much more regional thing, you wouldn't have something like, you might have like one big network match from Madison Square Garden every year. The the majority of territories, and they were territories, were like a state, like one half of a state or like two small states, and that would apply south of the border as well. I think the oldest continually operating promotion in the world, CMLL, which I could not tell you what it stands for, is still, I think, recognized, and I think still does technically recognize the NWA champ as like the world champion. And so that was how they were knit into it, but it was people like big touring acts were always a thing, which is like the other feature of territories versus modernity. It's a really, really weird thing. It was like you had guys basically running these little fiefdoms like they were like little mob bosses.
Mhm. So what you're saying is essentially Vince McMahon is like Otto von Bismarck for wrestling, if I'm understanding you
Kinda,
correctly.
yeah. It's not like a terrible comparison.
Well, and
It's
It's funny. Also, I know NWA, like the National Wrestling Association, because like Billy Corgan of all people bought it and
Yep.
owns it. Like, the guy from
That was
Smashing Pumpkins.
so weird.
But honestly, I don't know if you're a Smashing Pumpkins fan, but like if you know the Smashing Pumpkins and Billy Corgan as a person, it kind of tracks actually. And
No, it makes
he's
perfect
also
sense.
yeah, and he's from
He
the
was
Midwest, so
the only reason he bought NWA is because he couldn't buy a different promotion.
mhm. But it's a very interesting side road, and I almost want to like just talk wrestling the whole time since it's one of those things that like I never got super into because like I'm just so very much not a sports guy. Um, I love the pageantry and everything, basically everything that you mentioned. But like once they start fighting, it's like, okay, this is not quite as interesting to me. But that kind of leads me to another thing that I wanted to talk to you about. And you had a really funny quote in one of your articles. And again, I apologize for misquoting you 100%,
Cool.
but something to the degree of like, women get really annoyed when you talk about JFK all the time, when you're talking about an Oliver Stone movie. And which I think is very true and very funny. I think I said to you, like, for me, it's like, my wife, I'll rant to her about like the CIA or something like that. She's like, okay, sweetie. She's very sweet and very patient. She'll listen to me, and I'll listen to her talk about YouTuber drama or something like that. But all that to say, it kind of makes me think of Oliver Stone as a filmmaker, because I just recently did another podcast where I talked about the 1982 Conan the Barbarian, which is one of my favorite movies of all time. And I didn't even know until I looked into Oliver Stone movies, because of some of the conversations we were having, that Oliver Stone co-wrote or co-directed, I believe it was, the 1982 Conan the Barbarian movie, which I feel dovetails really well with what you're saying about wrestling, but also like Oliver Stone as a filmmaker in general, just because I looked at his filmography and he's just so all over the place. It's like Boomer id in the same way that wrestling is like America's id, of just all this different, seemingly different stuff that's all in a blender together and somehow works.
Yeah, so Ollie Stone is such a weird figure. I mean, what he wrote Scarface. He was, I think he was tight in that period with Brian De Palma when he was also really hot, and so it's like you're able to kind of. I had no idea he even co-directed Conan. That's a weird
co-directed or co-wrote. And
that's a weird blind spot for me. I still watch that one.
And maybe this might have been like a Google AI hallucinating, but it was on the official IMDb page. So, but it kind of makes sense. And I guess you have like larger, because you were talking about I think it was Any Given Sunday, but like any larger thoughts on like where American film has been / is going? Because at least to me, like Oliver Stone feels like he was very symbolic of a different era, where again to me it's boomer id of like the schmaltziest of schmaltz, but also like weird, kind of cynical, like boomer QAnon stuff, because they're to me like I can get into like Jeffrey Epstein, but I don't really care about JFK, for example. And he did what was that movie, W, which I remember seeing around the time when it came out, and I like to say I was insufferable from a young age, and I thought it was going to be like they're making fun of George W. Bush, and I was like politically active enough to know that it was like Colbert Report level of like, oh, it's funny to make fun of the president, but it was a very like serious and thoughtful portrayal. So Oliver Stone is just all over the place, and I have mixed feelings about the movie Alexander, for example, but it's just he's such a weird filmmaker like that, where he's very eclectic, I guess you could say.
I gotta watch his Nixon movie too. Maybe I have an Ollie Stone month. But anyway, I think like just to go back to the initial quote, I think like so I kind of orbit around conspiracy culture. I think it's one of those things you need to have like a at least a base understanding of. It's
like an inoculation.
it's a little like a high wire act. You kind of want to like look down into the pit and not fall into the pit, which can be tricky. And it's important to exercise a little trigger discipline and keep some stuff under your hat. As I've grown increasingly fond of saying, you can always just not post. But like, I think there's this paradoxical thing that occurs with stuff like JFK or like any other. Jeffrey Epstein's a great example of this. Like any QAnon, of course, being maybe the best and most certainly the highest bandwidth modern example of this, where the more you understand or think you understand about this sort of thing, the less you are able to explain it to another human being. So I actually, when I have this book right here on my shelf, Chaos by Tom O'Neill, which is a fantastic book about Charles Manson and the just like it kind of rolls along and collects a lot of these like kind of the who's who of 60s conspiracy threads. And it's a fascinating book, but I finished it and I'm like, I can never talk about this to another human being that hasn't read this book because I'm going to sound like I'm an insane person.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
But okay. If you want to jump in, I'll pick it up with the film. I don't want to screw you out.
No, go hard on that. That's
but
I feel
anyway,
like
so I remain a pretty active film guy. I have a letterboxd, and I tend to watch, I'd say, around like 100 movies a year at an absolute minimum. I try to see as much new stuff as interests me, and I think like I have there's a lot of the changes that have been made. I think people want to like. I always find it a little odd that people talk about like, oh, this is the end of film. It's going extinct. Like, okay, yeah, maybe the multiplex model is going extinct, which it's a bad business model. It should probably go, but people still want to make movies, and I think there are still really good movies being made pretty much every year. And I think I was talking about this with a friend who's also on Substack, and he gave himself, I think, one of the most insane challenges I've ever heard somebody give themselves, where his idea for his blog was he was going to review every single #1 box office movie from the day he was born to the present day. And he's been at it for a year now. But like, so we were talking about this, and he said that when you really see the sea change with film is with ID4, Independence Day, because in like, not that everything was sunshine and rainbows before this, obviously, but like there was this prior conception of, okay, well, we'll just give the viewing public the sort of the assorted box of chocolates. You know, okay, you'll have a romance, you'll have a comedy, you'll have an action movie, you'll have a mystery, you'll have a thriller, you'll have a horror movie, and you know, whatever makes money makes money. Obviously, as Roger Corman talks about this really well in his autobiography, the studios play a huge hand in what actually makes money with film distribution. But like, you know, we'll give the viewing public a spread, and they'll tell us what they want. When ID4 happened, the studios kind of cleared the pool for it and let it run on as many screens as possible for as long as possible, and it made a ton of money. And so that's where you begin to see the shift from like these sorts of from like a more eclectic industry towards, we're going to organize everything around tent poles, like big tent pole blockbusters for one fiscal quarter a piece, and we're going to just whatever else we can fit in is what we'll make beyond that. But the main way we make our money is through something like Independence Day, or at 10, as it would be 10 years hence, something like an MCU movie.
Interesting, because I would say at most I'm a casual film goer, but funnily enough, I just did as of recording this, it'll be released by the time this is released. I did a podcast with a friend of the show, Ancient Problems. We were talking about Independence Day, and it's one of those things where like it's something not made that long ago, but it feels so much older, but at the same time kind of perennial, maybe for the reason that you said, because it has just so much going on. And I'll say, to its credit, it's a very tight script, and it's a very like non-script what
Nothing wrong with ID4. Certainly nothing wrong with
ID4. It's a fun movie, and it's very non-cynical in a way that that you wouldn't see today, and especially in contrast, because I watched about an hour of Independence Day Insurgents and couldn't get through it. It was total dog shit. I don't know if you saw that one, but it felt like a sci-fi original channel movie that, conveniently, like basically all of the main characters from the first one died in the first 10 minutes or died off screen. Um, but I don't, I'm curious to what you think, because you said maybe the multiplex model is going away. I don't know if you follow like the YouTube channel Red Letter Media, and they've talked about this. I remember reading something a little while ago where Steven Spielberg thinks that Hollywood is going to die by the end of the 2020s. And at least for me, I've, since I think it was 2019 or 2020, I've seen a grand total of 3 movies in the theater just because it feels like, kind of like you said, it's either these giant tentpole things, and I'm kind of marveled out, or it's very niche or something pandering to one side of the culture war or the other. That somebody like me who's maybe not quite in the middle, but doesn't really feel an allegiance to either side of the culture war, I find very alienating. So I kind of joke that my rule is like just don't watch anything made after 2015. And I saw like Dune 1 and 2 and Napoleon, and that's all I've seen in the last like 5 years. But I want to fall in love with movies again, because I remember I used to love watching movies, but now it can feel a little bit more tedious. So as a big cinephile, what's your pitch for somebody like me? I love something like either Independence Day or even smaller, more independent and thoughtful films as well. And to me, it feels like, anytime, if it's going to be in like major theaters from Hollywood, I'm just kind of burnt out on Hollywood.
So, all right, I'll try to run through these as you pitched them to me. Please keep me honest if I've let one slip by.
No, go ahead, and I apologize. I tend to ramble.
It's quite all right. I did not see New Independence Day. I think it just didn't really seem like anything more than, well, may as well make another one. Still got the rights.
It's awful. Don't bother.
Yeah, sure. But like, I do think it's a not. I don't necessarily think it's a bad bet to say that Hollywood will probably begin to become more obsolete. You're seeing a broader conglomeration within that sector anyway. It's like, what, Disney bought Fox. Like, we just kind of forget about that.
Oh, yeah.
But it's well, I mean, they certainly have forgotten about it. They send Searchlight films out to die on the regular, and a decent chunk of them are pretty good. But it's I think you're going to see like the tentpole model, and this is actually maybe how we get back to video games, because it's wreaking havoc in that particular industry as well. It's becoming more and more of a bad bet, especially in an era where you have trained the viewing public to believe that for $20 a month, $25 a month, whatever it is you pay for Netflix or Prime or Paramount or whatever you buy, you get all the movies for free. It is now much harder to justify going to a movie house, even a really nice one, and spending $14, $18, $25 on a ticket to see one movie. So you kind of, the snake has eaten its own tail in that respect. But I still like to go, just because I like going to the movies, and I'm blessed to be in an area with a lot of good movie theaters, and movie theaters that are showing not only like older films where it's like, oh, I'd absolutely see that on a big screen, but also newer stuff that just kind of piques my curiosity. And I think that's ultimately what it comes back to as far as getting back into it. Like, I ignore a lot of stuff, like compared to some friends of mine who, like, I what did he say? He said he's seen like a guy I was talking to today said he'd seen like 50, 70 new release movies this year. I'm like, that's insane. Where do you find the time? And it's like, but like, what you're not even saying, because you don't want to be insulting, obviously, is that it's like, well, you're going to sit through all that crap just to try and find the good ones.
What percentage is Marvel movies, just, statistically speaking?
What, it'd only be like 2 or 3, but who knows at this point. Actually, so I am somewhat interested in the new FF, and I was actually reasonably interested in Thunderbolts, because I tend to like those sort of like B tier team books that have a lot of like weird miscellaneous characters in them, because they tend to have the editorial distance to be interesting. But like, I now am riding a streak of not having seen a Marvel movie in any format since Endgame. So I'm now like, I might just want to keep that going.
That's been my policy.
Yeah, it's like, maybe I just see how far I can take it until I get stuck on a plane with like nothing better to do but toss on Guardians of the Galaxy or whatever.
Mhm.
But I do think it just comes back to curiosity. Just find something that you think can pique your curiosity. Like in general, I think the way the most of the I think the industry is heading towards like the tentpole model. Probably like imploding like a dying star and probably taking a decent chunk of the industry as it exists with it. But I think you're seeing a thriving, not it's you can't really call it independent anymore because there's too much like private equity money behind it, but imprints like A24, Neon are building these sort of big dependable fan bases that will go out to movies to support their work. And I think the real winner, the guys who are earliest to market on this and are reaping the biggest rewards, are actually Blumhouse. Do you know Blumhouse?
I know of them by reputation that they do fairly inexpensive movies that are kind of varying in quality from kind of like, shitty B movie to like surprisingly, wow, this is really good.
Yeah, exactly. And so what they do is they're overwhelmingly they produce horror movies. They get so it's like, okay, we're going to option a script very cheaply. We're going to produce it fairly cheaply. But here's the thing: if you're spending your money wisely, fairly cheaply can be a lot nicer than you think it is nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
And if we're wrong, we're wrong small. But if we hit one in a year, we can wipe out 3 years of bad bets and still be in the green. And that's, I think, something we do forget is the business of movies is the business of placing, like, at a minimum to make a feature film, it's like $20 million to make it and then $20 million to promote it. You're placing that bet on, like, and that's what I think ultimately has afflicted the American movie industry is scared money don't make money. And I think they're kind of, they feel they've lost a connection with their audience, which I think is best exemplified by guys like you.
Yeah, and here's the thing: I'm not one of there's. I feel like something like Star Wars. Like I was such a big fan of Star Wars when I was a kid, and there's so much discourse about the culture war stuff, and I'm somebody like who maybe not straight down the middle, but I don't. I'm not like watching 7-hour video essays about why the Last Jedi is woke and raped my childhood. I was like, I just didn't really like that movie. I didn't think it was a very good movie, and I feel like a lot of this stuff has lost me just because I think maybe there is something to be said about like a at least to me, it feels like this very weird cultural moment where it's this reactionary back and forth between two poles of the culture war that doesn't really speak to probably the majority of people. And, you're making movies to kind of dunk on your Twitter followers. But to me, that's kind of not even the most important part of like, these aren't even good movies. And I was stunned by how cheap, I don't even remember what the last one was called. The last Disney Star Wars was, it's like, wow, this looks really, really cheap and really, really bad. You're Disney. Why does this look so bad? And I'm wondering if maybe that'll be the direction that it goes. Because I think on one hand, like, there's endless discourse, endless, grist for the mill about anytime a live action Disney remake comes out and it does well or doesn't do well. Like the most recent one I think of is the Snow White movie, and I kind of don't find a lot of the culture war stuff that interesting. To me, like the interesting thing is it flopped, but like why are you spending $250 million on a Snow White remake? Like part of the reason the Conan the Barbarian, the 1982 one, is one of my favorite movies, and I think it's aged really well, is because I mean, I think it was something made with a lot of passion and by people like Oliver Stone or John Miliaris, I don't know how you pronounce his name, or people like James Earl Jones or Mako. But I think they made it with a relatively small budget, and you have to be more creative when you have a smaller budget. Like you think of Star Wars and Disney as kind of soulless corporate trash now, but when George Lucas was making Star Wars originally in the 70s, it was on like a relatively small budget, and finding ways to be creative with less than optimal materials.
That's something I really like. At some point, I'm going to become brave enough to say New Hope is my favorite Star Wars movie, because that's something I really do love about it, is that everything is like lashed together with like chicken wire and gaffer tape, and they needed to put it back together after every shot. It looks like it's so made up as it goes along. It's so
And it
funny.
gave it such an aesthetic because of that. Like it ended up becoming unintentional world building of like moving away from like the Flash Gordon, like everything's bright and shiny sci-fi, to the lived-in world of the original Star Wars, at least.
But anyway, just to, before I let it get away from me, I've said I didn't even see Rise of Skywalker. I was like, I thought Last Jedi was fine, but I have a bone to pick with it because it tore open a portal to hell and forced us all to debate its quality forever. My like, I'd have a question for you, but I'd like to say one thing before I pose it, which is
Go ahead.
when you look at like I mentioned A24 earlier. If I recall correctly, it was one of theirs. It was either them or Neon. The Brutalist, which came out last year, did pretty well at the awards. They shot that movie for $10 million in a month in Pennsylvania. It looks great. It looks better than most stuff that costs $300 million and requires an army of consultants and VFX workers and all this other stuff. And that's where I think it's like, at a certain point, you just need to admit that this is the better way to do it. There's going to be a lot of money set on fire getting from where we are to where we're going. But at a certain point, it just makes more sense to spend a little less money, and therefore you need to make a little less money to break even. But I've been turning this over in my head for ages, and I think we have an ideal point to deploy it now. I would love to see the actual numbers on this. Do you think Disney has actually made money on Star Wars? It sounds obvious, but then you give it some thought, and it's like,
Yeah, well, that's a good question. I mean, you probably know this type of thing better than I do. I know, generally speaking, you double the budget for marketing for any given movie. And I know there's been a couple of flops with the Star Wars stuff. Because I know, backing up, they bought Star Wars from George Lucas for $4 billion. I know that and this is all very opaque, and again, you probably know this better than I do, that the Disney Plus has basically been a money hole, and there's been some pretty high profile flops from the Disney streaming stuff. So that's a really good question, man. Honestly, like, I think they've probably made money, but maybe not anywhere near as much as they would have liked to.
I suspect they're in the green entirely on merchandising, but like you said, you start off.
I would wonder about that too, though, because I saw that they were like, nobody was. Well, I mean, say what you will, and I don't want to relitigate The Last Jedi. Like, I just didn't like it. Basically, because I was a Star Wars nerd, and I just don't care for anything else Rian Johnson has done. But like, kids don't want to buy a Rose Tico toy. Like, say what you will about Jar Jar Binks, but like, kids wanted to buy Jar Jar Binks toys. Like, it's not like you can do the big high concept kitschy stuff that kids like, or you could try to do the dark and grounded like postmodern deconstruction of The Last Jedi, but you can't really do both. So I'd wonder about the merchandising stuff too.
I think I'm really curious about it because, like you said, you're $4 billion in the hole to start. You're immediately probably another $1 billion in the hole, just like making the movies. You're building the theme park, all the other stuff, and like it will pay eventually, I guess. But like the Disney Plus thing is, I suspect, the real albatross, because, and this is another thing we're going to have to sort out if we ever want to get back to a healthy entertainment landscape, is TV used to be the medium that you could make on the cheap and still make it as a high quality product and put it out regularly. Now we are making TV where an individual episode costs as much as a feature film.
Yeah.
And it's not making anyone any money. It's just an excuse to depress actor salaries and writer salaries and all the people that actually make the stuff salaries. That's the only thing it is.
I think I remember hearing that Andor cost like $10 million an episode, or what's that other one? The Acolyte was costing like $10 million an episode.
I don't know. Mando probably costs a lot of money, which, again, I haven't watched any of this stuff.
Which
a lot of people do, but it's
Well, I watched like the first season and a half of Mandalorian, and I thought it's okay. It felt like and I mean this as a compliment as somebody who enjoys schlocky sci-fi, but it felt like a 2000 sci-fi original channel TV show that was Star Wars flavored. But I was like, I kind of get it. I didn't hate Baby Yoda as much as I thought I was going to. But with some of this stuff, like I was startled by how bad it looks like. And this is maybe, you kind of touched on the conspiracy theory thing. One of my like very non-political conspiracy theories is a lot of this shit is just money laundering at this point. Like, because like, how are you spending $10 million an episode and it looks like some of the other like Mandalorian people who aren't Pedro Pascal, like it looks like you got your costume from like one of those Halloween discount plus warehouses that open up at the end of every September.
I don't know how much you can even call that a conspiracy theory. I think that's just kind of like what that one Netflix did. I got roped into watching this, and it was like the Electric State was like that cost $360 million, and it looked like a haunted house ride, and was just I don't think you can. I assume some of it is going out the back door somehow. I just don't know whose pocket it ends up in. I suppose I'll figure it out in 25 years when someone writes a book.
Yeah, well, because that's another one of the things where like and I know Netflix successfully sued over this, and I feel like maybe the House of Cards might come down, and maybe Spielberg will be proven correct with his prediction of Hollywood collapsing by the end of the 2020s, because streaming companies don't have to disclose their numbers unless they run ads, and like some of the advertisers sued them because the numbers you're saying you're getting for these things are not lining up. There's been so many cases where like the one that sticks out at me is like the ones they had on the show that came out a couple years ago. Like, this is the most streamed show on Netflix ever. It's like, is it? I don't know anybody in real life who talks about this.
Well, yeah, they when I was writing on this, that was kind of my theory. I think you're right on it. Is that they have all this incentive to lie. They have all this incentive to cook their books. Netflix is a company where the stock price has gone up, and it's venture capital backed, but they amortize a lot of expenditures to appear profitable on paper, but they've never actually made money. And so you're like, yeah, I mean, like people I'm sure will be like, well, it's a normal accounting thing, but like the fact that like this is one of the things that really shifted with the tech boom in the wake of the recession was that a lot of these companies don't actually need to make money to become huge and employ a lot of people, pay a lot of people a lot of money, become culturally ubiquitous. It's because all the money is they source their money from venture capital, from private equity. But the Netflix thing is it's interesting how we go out of our way to not learn anything about this, because the infamous pivot to video that more or less killed new media as we knew it in the back half of the 2010s, that was basically all based on a lie, and it's the same kind of lies that I think these streaming platforms probably tell. I mean, allegedly, don't sue me, non-actionable comedy podcast, but the number is always like minutes streamed or like seconds engaged. It's always these like weird oblique statistics where you can turn it out inside out and upside down and stretch it and like put your finger on the scale. And I don't like Netflix's continued cultural ubiquity is kind of a mystery to me, but I do think they're probably one of the more honest ones, because I know people who do engage with all the new stuff. But again, it's like you're still spending what every episode of Stranger Things is like $15 million, and it doesn't look good.
Yeah, I mean, think about not even taking into account the original programming, like the licensing and everything. And I was under the impression that Netflix was the only one that was profitable. And if that's not true, streaming feels like it's definitely a house of cards. And this is maybe a little bit out of scope for the discussion of movies, but I feel like there's a lot of hype around AI for that reason. That like if it sounds like you're adjacent to that world, but I'm in that world of the Silicon Valley world and startups, and it's so rare that any of these things make any money that there needs to be, okay, no, here's the next thing, and here's a way that we can actually make money from all this data that we've been collecting. And I'm going to be really interested to see if in the coming years that some of these studios are going to try to incorporate AI and how people will react. Because at least to me right now, Netflix original series is already synonymous with how you would have talked about straight to video release. In an earlier generation or in my childhood, or much in the same way that like AI is kind of synonymous to me with, low effort kind of stock photos. And to play devil's advocate, I think it could be maybe used in some interesting or at least cost cutting methods of like, say, for like animation or 3D rendering. Like a lot of that stuff is more technical and programming than artistic. But I feel like I don't know. I'm definitely curious to what you think about this. Like I and everybody's always like, oh, AI will get over the next hump. But at least right now, like it feels like there's the uncanny valley, in a way that even like, shitty 3D animation doesn't hit you with. And I feel like maybe people will like instinctually reject that, or maybe that'll be how Hollywood tries to save itself with like a generation of AI slop and, whatever Star Wars movie you want. It's like a choose your own adventure, and you get dead-eyed AI Mark Hamill into the 2080s.
Hollywood can't do it is the thing, because they're so heavily unionized. That was actually one of the big things that drove the writer's strike over the past, what was it, 2023? That like they got it written into the contracts. They can't, like, they're granted, they'll offshore stuff. They're still gonna do it. They just can't do it necessarily in Hollywood. I think with AI, again, this is just my natural cynicism about this stuff kicking in. I do see it first and foremost as a marketing play. I work with ChatGPT more or less every day. It's a very fast, a very comprehensive, a very interesting piece of technology, but I don't see it as fundamentally that different from a lot of other chatbots I've worked with. And I think, like, it does certain things that I think we're not going to realize how damaging it is until 25 years someone will write a book. Like, one thing I really noticed ever since they shipped the latest model is that it really goes out of its way to placate the user. And now I'm
still
seeing
obsequious.
Yeah, no, now I'm seeing stuff hitting like Newsweek and stuff about people having like religious delusions about, because ChatGPT has convinced them they're the next great prophet or whatever. Now I don't know how real that is. Like, it's all just Reddit stuff until someone's running down the street with a meat cleaver trying to harvest my organs for the Omnissiah. But as far as AI goes, I do think it is already in the groundwater as far as entertainment goes, but it has nothing to do with big IP entertainment, at least not technically. It has nothing to do with Hollywood, at least not technically. It has everything to do with pornography. And I wrote an essay about this.
Oh, no.
I wrote an essay about this for the first issue of Literary Magazine. I should have been plugging from the very first minute Kindness Report, which I've launched, which I was lucky enough to be included in with several other very talented people here on Substack. But I just think like it's running through the incognito tab Hot 100 like the Ebola virus. It's like it's like a massacre, which like it kind of makes sense. It is like the most natural. Like the thing everybody always brings up is the Luddites versus the mechanical looms. This is just that again. That's that in the truest sense of the word, because it used to be you could make it was actually one of the best ways to monetize your art if you could draw a good cartoon. Is I'll open my commissions, throw me $25 and I'll draw you some porn. Now you can throw an AI generator guy $25 and he'll give you 75 images of porn versus one. So people need to make that value proposition, and unfortunately the kind of workaday perverts are losing badly.
You hate to see it. The hardworking blue collar pervert is being pushed up by AI. Uh,
Forever the case. Forever the
yeah,
case.
well, it is fun. Well, I mean, pretty much, and I'm sure this is something that you know, but for the audience, like pretty much every new form of technology has been, if not driven, but like shaped by pornography, like that. And this is maybe apocryphal, and maybe you know better than I do. Like the reason that VHS won over Laserdisc is because like it was easier to put porn on it, or it was cheaper because of that. So but it's I guess I don't even want to get into it. Like, AI is so like creepy and soulless to me, but I suppose it's kind of like just pouring your id into a prompt and seeing what comes out. And who cares if every time you generate a new image, like a forest gets burnt up basically from the power usage of these data centers.
It is, yeah. Well, that's the interesting thing, and that's the real bottleneck they are hitting, is because they're making this marketing play to the general public, and a lot of people are buying it. But when you go into, like, let's say you and I have an AI model, we want to get $1 trillion of investment to get more power to fund more data centers. We go to Goldman Sachs, we ask for a $1 trillion check. They say, okay, show us a $1 trillion product you have, show us a $1 trillion problem this could solve, and they simply don't have one. And that's, I think, where you get into a lot of the the more magical stuff about big
Yeah.
or whatever. Like,
And that's kind of where I come down with a lot of this. Like, as somebody who works in this world and follows it, it feels, like you said, that there's no real return on investment. B, like the data center footprint, from my understanding, we're already at like 90% capacity. We don't have um, like the energy infrastructure to support what it wants, and it just seems like there's been a handful of successes in Silicon Valley. Like I worked at a startup, and it was kind of a stupid and pointless and unnecessary product. And there's been 15, 20 years so far of overwhelmingly like not very useful or profitable products that have been created. The only thing that has really been created is like, well, we have all this data. There's got to be some way to monetize it, and so far, not so much. And I don't know if it's just like a desperate marketing ploy. And at least to me, like whenever I hear these AI, these companies and these marketing people are talking about how it's going to, become sentient, and we have to worry about AGI, and it's going to take everybody's jobs. To me, it feels more like a marketing ploy. And maybe, even by the time this is released, I will look foolish. But, I think if you err on the side of nothing ever happens, then statistically speaking, you'll probably be more correct.
yeah, I'm like, if we get the AI universal basic income neat utopia, you won't hear me complaining. I'll be here clearing out my backlog of movies, games, books, etc. But I like, you can convince forum posters with all the kind of smoke and mirrors stuff. Jamie Dimon isn't cutting you $1 trillion check based on Rocco's Basilisk. He just isn't. Like, you need to tell somebody, okay, how does this pay in 15 to 20 years? Otherwise, you're just like, they're just going to tell you, okay, well, we can give you 10 million, 20 million, 30 million, but the actual amount of money you need to fundamentally transform a large swath of the way money is made, the way work is done, they're just not gonna pay you for it.
Mm-hmm. Not to mention that's kind of a self-defeating thing, because the only value added thing that I can think of is you can make it so you don't have to pay people. And okay, well, if people aren't getting paid, then people don't have money to buy things, and it kind of shoots the whole. I mean, that's kind of the only thing the American economy does now is consume. So it seems very short-sighted. And I think as greedy and short-sighted as capital can be, I think like that people like Jamie Dimon aren't going to be killing their golden goose.
Yeah, and we like, the other thing is, I think we're seeing this rather quickly. There's already a solution for we don't want to pay people, which is just go somewhere where people are cheaper. We already have, I think, maybe one of the best jokes about this whole phenomenon, which is the actual meaning of AI is an Indian or an Indonesian.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I suppose we will see what happens in the long term because, it could be a year from now. We are living in the I have no mouth and I know my scream future, or, it could be yet another nothing burger served up from the tech world cafeteria. But
In which case, there's what, 4 or 5 short straws, and the rest of us will be dead. So, here's hoping you and I don't draw those.
fingers crossed. But anyway, this is probably a good place to start winding down. I really appreciate you coming on. This has been a fun conversation. But I'd like to do. You mentioned it was the kindness report. You want to tell me a little bit more about that and do plugs and promotions and what to look out from you.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I have, let's see, I'm currently in the midst of kind of a soft hiatus from Substack. I'm working through a lot of the stuff I wrote while I was in Europe, the ongoing travelogue. That's, I'd say, about halfway, a little more than halfway done. As that begins, ideally, I will have a full draft of a novel by the time I wind that down. But either way, I'll be getting back to regular essays hopefully soon. Kind of hopefully planning to get back to some of what we've done and maybe give the blog another facelift as we continue to grow. Of course, there is the kindness report. Maybe the most exciting, most fulfilling thing I've become involved in since I have gotten more serious about Substack. It was a real, in terms of just getting involved with it and it coming to be, it was a real, walk down the right alley, join the right Discord, and you might find yourself anywhere. Me and a handful of other people, a large number of other people that whose work you likely enjoy if you're listening to this podcast, put out a literary magazine. The first issue of it is available. The second issue of it may be available very shortly after this comes out, or it may already be available. In any case, we are soliciting submissions. We are really, really excited about a decent chunk of the stuff we've gotten already, and we're looking forward to putting more people on, highlighting more great work we love. It is a free literary magazine, but we have a coffee and we have it is a free PDF you can download on our website. That is kindness-report.info. I think one of the best reviews we've gotten of it so far is that it will crash your PC when you attempt to open it, which I really like personally, and I hope we never change, because it's like you're downloading forbidden knowledge. It's very Neuromancer. It's very Ghost in the Shell. But if you are looking to submit, our reading period is running through the end of July, so there's a good chance we're past it, but we don't plan on slowing down. Please send us weird stuff you can't get placed other places. kindnessreportmag@gmail.com. We are really, really looking forward to seeing what else we get, because just the early arrivals have been very promising.
Well, that's very cool. And I will go ahead and link that in the show notes when we do this, and
Awesome.
I'll take a look. So, Klaus, I only have one final question for you that I always ask all of my guests to end with. The world is a little bit dark and gloomy and a little scary right now, but what's something that makes you feel hopeful for the future, or what's something that would?
I suppose I'll start with my own perspective, and then I'll try to broaden it. Personally, things have been good for me lately. Things have kind of been getting better for me while it's been getting worse for a lot of the world. And that kind of, you feel guilty about it sometimes. And you kind of just have to keep pushing and keep trying to do well with the station you're given. I moved to my current location. I found a job that pays my way and allows me to pursue my passions. I got engaged. I got published, not necessarily in that order, but one is certainly more important than the other. I've got more publications coming. I'm immensely fulfilled creatively, and I have a roof over my head. I have a large, needy cat that I'm going to have to go pay some attention after this. But just generally speaking, I guess the thing that really makes me hopeful for the future is people. I really think the one thing you can't abandon in life is a degree of faith in the human animal, regardless of how evil they may seem. Because I think when you get away from all the noise and all the nonsense, all the stuff about people blowing up relationships, cheating on their wives, cheating on their husbands, the constant stream of misery and nonsense that seems to permeate so much of the internet, and you get out into the world, you find people are fascinating and beautiful, and like I think if there's one thing that always makes me hopeful, it is that. It is just a degree of faith in the human animal.
Well, that is a very beautiful sentiment. And Klaus, has been a lot of fun. I appreciate you coming